Let yourself settle now, slowly, the way snow settles over a quiet field at the close of a long winter day, and let your breathing grow soft and unhurried as we travel together to a place older than the world you know. Long before there was earth or sky, before there were gods or men, before there was even a name for the dark, there was only a vast and patient emptiness. And tonight, you may rest inside that emptiness as gently as you would rest in your own bed. Imagine the cold drifting north and the warmth breathing south, and let the old story carry you without effort, the way a slow river carries a leaf towards sleep. The yawning gulf that holds all of this is called Ginnungagap, and you may let the word itself widen in your mind like a slow breath drawn in the dark, for it means the gaping void, the great emptiness that stretches without edge or end. There is nothing above it and nothing below it, no floor to fall toward and no ceiling to rise against, only a stillness so complete that it has never once been broken by sound. Picture yourself drifting at the very center of that calm, weightless and unhurried, with no need to reach for anything and no place you must be, simply held in the quiet between what will one day become the realms of all living things. To the north of this void, there lies a region that has always been cold, and to the south, a region that has always burned, and between them the emptiness waits, patient as deep water, while you let your shoulders soften and your thoughts grow slow. In the north is the realm called Niflheim, the home of mist and shadow, a country of ice and frost and endless grey, where the air itself seems to hang heavy and still, and where nothing moves quickly because everything is half asleep beneath the cold. At the heart of Niflheim bubbles a spring named Ymir, the roaring kettle, the oldest of all wells, and from this single source flow many rivers, the icy rivers known together as the Ylviga. They run outward from the spring into the dark, and as they travel far from their warm beginning they thicken and slow, the way breath turns to frost on a winter morning, until at last their waters harden into layer upon layer of ancient ice. Let yourself imagine those rivers freezing slowly, quietly, each ripple stilled into glass, each current laid gently to rest, and feel how the cold itself can be a kind of peace, a settling, a hush spreading across the edge of the void. And in the south, far across that great emptiness, there lies the opposite of all this cold, the realm called Muspelheim, a country of fire and light and unbearable heat. Here the air shimmers and glows, and sparks rise and drift like restless stars, and rivers of flame move where in the north there is only ice. So fierce is this brightness that none who are not born to it could ever dwell there, yet from far away, across the safe and cooling distance of the void, you may simply watch the warm glow of it, the way you might watch the last embers of a hearth fire breathing softly in the dark while you sink deeper towards sleep. The fire of the south sends its warmth drifting north, and the ice of the north sends its chill drifting south, and the two move toward each other slowly across the patient emptiness of Ginnungagap. And it was there, in the very middle of the void, where the warm breath of Muspelheim at last met the frozen rivers of Niflheim, that something began to change. The fire softened the ancient ice, and the ice gave up its hardness drop by drop, and in that gentle meeting place, neither too cold nor too hot, the melting frost began to stir with life. Out of the thawing rime, from the dripping and the warming and the slow quickening of what had been frozen, there took shape the first living being the worlds had ever known. His name was Ymir, the great frost giant, vast beyond all measure, the eldest of all who would ever live, and he came into being there in the quiet, formed not by any hand, but by the simple meeting of cold and warmth in the stillness of the gap. Ymir was enormous and untroubled, and in time a heaviness came over him, and he lay down in the warmth and the mist, and fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. As he slept, his great body grew warm, and from the sweat that gathered beneath his left arm there came forth a son and a daughter, born gently while he never woke. And from his two legs together was born another, a giant with many heads, said to have 6 in all. So it was that the first family of frost giants, the ancient race called the Rime Giants, came quietly into the world from the sleeping body of Ymir himself, without struggle, without sound, the way one dream gives rise softly to the next. Let yourself rest in that image of effortless beginning, of life appearing while the first giant slept on, undisturbed, in the warm heart of the void. But Ymir, vast as he was, needed something to sustain him, and so from the same melting ice another great being took shape, gentler than the giant and older in kindness. This was the cow Audhumla, the nourisher, formed from the thawing rime as the frost continued to soften and run. From her udder flowed 4 wide rivers of milk, 4 steady streams of warmth and plenty, and these flowed to Ymir and fed him, so that the first giant drank from the first cow and was content, the two of them alone together in the enormous quiet, the great drinker and the gentle giver of milk. Imagine those 4 pale rivers moving slowly through the mist, simple and endless and calm, a feeding as quiet as a candle burning, and let that calm feed you as well, easing you a little further down toward rest. Yet Audhumla too had need of nourishment, and what she found to feed upon was salt, for the ancient ice was salty, and the rime tasted of the sea. So she began to lick the great blocks of salty ice, slowly, patiently, with her warm, rough tongue, hour upon hour and day upon day in that timeless place where there was no day or night at all. And as she licked, something hidden within the ice began to appear. On the first day, beneath her patient licking, there emerged the hair of a man, soft and pale in the frost. On the second day, a head came forth, and on the third day the whole figure was uncovered, freed at last from the ice that had held it. This was Beri, the first of the gods, beautiful and strong and fair to look upon, drawn slowly into being by nothing more than the gentle, unhurried work of the cow upon the salt. And as Beri rose from the melting ice into the quiet of the void, the long, patient beginning of all things was nearly done, for from him the line of the gods would soon descend, and the next chapter of the old story was waiting, gently, to begin. Beri lay locked within the rime, and the patient tongue of Audhumla worked over the salty ice through the long, formless hours, until on the first day a head of hair came free, and on the second a forehead and a face, fair and clear, and on the third the whole man stepped out of the frost, tall and strong and beautiful, with the cold falling away from his shoulders like a discarded garment. This was Beri, the first of his kind, neither giant nor beast, but something new in the wide nothing, the ancestor of all the gods who were yet to come. Let yourself imagine him standing there in the grey half-light between the ice and the fire, drawing his first slow breath in a world that held only the dripping cow, the sleeping bulk of Ymir, and the endless reach of Ginnungagap. He had no kin and no companions, only the silence and the slow turning of the mists, and yet in him stirred a warmth and a brightness that the frost-born brood of Ymir had never carried. In time, and the time of these first beings was long and unhurried, Beri fathered a son named Bor, born of that same strange vitality that had woken in the ice. And Bor grew tall in the quiet of the early world, walking the borderlands where the warm air of the south met the rising cold of the north. The frost giants had multiplied by then, for from the sweat of Ymir's sleeping body more of his kind had come, a son and a daughter forming beneath one arm, and a six-headed being growing from the joining of his feet, so that the line of the rhyme-thyrses spread outward, restless and many. Among the daughters of that brood was Bisla, a giantess of the old stock, child of the giant Baldr, and Bor took her to be his wife. Picture the two of them coming together across that vast and lonely emptiness, the line of the new and the line of the old joined for a while in quiet union, and from that joining came not one child but three. The three were brothers, and their names were Odin, Vili, and Ve. They were the sons of Bor and Bisla, and in them the gifts of both their parents ran together and were changed into something the world had not yet seen. From their father's father, from Beri who had risen shining out of the ice, they took a clarity of spirit and a wakeful, ordering mind. From their mother's side, from Baldr and the deep old strength of the giants, they took endurance and a vastness that could stand against the cold. Let yourself rest a moment in the thought of them, three brothers growing into their power in a world still half unmade, walking together through the mists with no roads to follow and no realms yet raised, only the great sleeping body of Ymir, the dripping cow, and the gulf of Ginnungagap stretching on every side. And as they grew apart from the giants, though they shared blood with them. The frost giants were many now, and they multiplied without measure or purpose, a brood that spread and quarreled and filled the cold places of the north with their numberless kind, caring nothing for order, nothing for shape, nothing for what might be made of the empty world. But Odin and his brothers were not like them. In Odin there woke a deep and restless longing to know, a hunger for wisdom that would one day drive him to terrible sacrifices. In Vili there ran a steady will and the desire to give form to things. In Ve there moved a quiet care for what was holy and set apart. They were the first true gods, distinct from the giants not in strength alone, but in the turning of their thoughts, in their wish to bring meaning where there had been only frost and fire, and the long, indifferent silence. So picture them standing together at the edge of the great gulf, three brothers looking out across a world that was all beginnings and no completion, where the only order was the slow drip of the cow and the slow breath of the sleeping ancient. They looked upon the endless brood of Ymir spreading through the cold, the rhyme-thyrses without count or kindness, and they looked upon the formless void itself, the gaping nothing that had been before all things, and they understood, in the calm and certain way of the very young who are also very wise, that it could not remain as it was. The giants would go on multiplying without end, and the void would go on gaping without shape, and nothing fair or lasting would ever rise in such a world unless someone willed it into being. Something had to change, something had to be made. And so a resolve grew in the three of them, quiet at first and then unshakable, a purpose that would set the whole of the coming ages in motion. They would not let the world stay as a wilderness of frost and fire and shapeless dark. They would give it order and edges and light, raise lands and seas and a sky overhead, and find a place for all the things that were yet to live. But to make a world, they would need the very stuff of which worlds are made, and there was only one source of such vast material in all the silence of Ginnungagap, only one body large enough to become the earth and the heavens and the encircling sea. Their eyes turned, slowly and without anger, toward the great sleeping shape of Ymir, the first of the giants, mountainous and breathing in the mist. And in that long, quiet-looking the first age of the world drew gently toward its close, and the shaping of all things drew near. The wound that the three brothers opened in the great frost giant Ymir was deep beyond all measure, and from it the long and terrible work of making began. Odin, Vili, and Vi, the sons of Bor, had grown weary of the hunger and the formlessness of those first days, the endless meeting of frost and fire in the yawning emptiness, and so they turned at last against the eldest of all living things, the giant who had been nursed by the great cow Ordhumler in the dim beginning. Together the three of them set upon Ymir, and though he was vast as a mountain range and old as the rime itself, he could not stand against them, and he fell. And as he fell, the slow ages of his sleeping life poured out of him. So much blood ran from Ymir that it rose like a tide across the whole of that empty country. It welled up and spread and deepened into a dark and roaring flood. And in that flood, nearly all the frost giants who had sprung from Ymir's own sweating body in the early time were swept away and drowned. The lineage of the rime-cold ones, born while the giants slept, was very nearly ended there, carried under by the rising of his blood. Yet not quite all of them perished. For one giant named Ymir, with his wife beside him, climbed into a hollowed vessel, a great trough or a cradle of wood, and floated upon the surface of that flood while it carried away his kin. The two of them rode out the drowning, lifted and borne along, and when the waters at last grew still, they came to rest in some far and frozen place. From Ymir and his wife came all the giants of the later world, the Jotnar of Jotunheim, the long line of frost and stone that would trouble the gods through all the ages to come. So even in that great unmaking, a thread of the old giant kind was saved, and giants there would always be. When the flood had spent itself and settled, the three brothers came to the body of Ymir where it lay, and they took it up. It was a labor fit for gods, for the corpse was greater than any island, greater than any range of hills, and they bore it slowly into the very center of Ginnungagap, into the middle of the yawning void between the cold and the fire. And there, in that central emptiness, they began to shape the world out of him, for there was nothing else from which a world might be made. Every part of Ymir they took, and nothing they wasted, and piece by piece the giant who had been the first of all became the home of all that was to come. Of his flesh they made the earth itself, the broad and patient land, soft soil and rolling field laid out beneath the open air. From his blood, which had drowned his kindred, they made the seas and the lakes, all the salt waters that ring the shores, and all the still waters that gather in the low places of the ground, so that the very flood became the ocean and the cool depths of every mere. His bones, hard and long and white, they raised up to be the mountains, the high backbones of the land that lean against the weather. His teeth and the splintered fragments of bones that had shattered in the felling, they scattered across the world to be the rocks and the boulders and the small stones that lie everywhere upon the earth, the gravel of the riverbeds and the scree upon the slopes. Picture the giant becoming the very ground beneath you, his stillness settling into hill and shore and stone. Then they lifted his skull. The great curved dome of the giant's head they raised high above the new-made earth, and they set it overhead to be the sky, a vast roof arching over all the world. And so that the sky might not fall, they took 4 dwarfs, small and strong and tireless, and set one beneath each of its 4 corners to hold it forever in place. The dwarf called Nordri they placed in the north, and Sudri in the south, and Ostri in the east, and Vestri in the west. And there beneath the 4 quarters of the heavens, those 4 have stood and held the sky aloft from that day onward, each in his own corner, bearing the weight of the world's great ceiling without rest. When the sky stood firm upon its dwarf-set corners, the brothers looked toward Muspelheim, the land of fire that had burned in the south since before the world was. From that realm of flame came drifting sparks and glowing embers, cinders thrown out of the everlasting fire, and these the gods gathered and caught, and set into the underside of Ymir's skull. The brightest and the greatest of the sparks they fixed to give light by day and by night. And so the sun was set in the dome of the sky, and the moon beside it, to ride the heavens in their turns. The lesser sparks they scattered across the whole vault of the dark, and these became the stars, the countless small fires that hang in the night, each one given its place and its path to follow, so that even when the great lights had set, the sky would never be wholly dark. There remained yet the giant's brains, and these the brothers took and cast up into the air above the new world, and they became the clouds, soft and grey and wandering, drifting between the earth below and the skull dome above, gathering and parting and gathering again, carrying rain to the waiting land. So even the soft inward parts of Ymir found their place, floating high over field and sea, shadowing the ground, and then letting through the light. And when sea and land and stone and sky were made, and the lights were set turning, and the clouds set drifting, the gods looked upon the broad earth and saw that it lay open and exposed, ringed all about its edges by the deep and restless ocean made of Ymir's blood. Along the far outer shore of that sea the giant kind would dwell, the children of Bergilmir, fierce and unfriendly to gentler life. So the gods marked out a place in the middle of the world, sheltered and guarded, and from the giant's eyebrows, those great curving ridges, they raised a wall to fence it round and keep the hostile giants out. This guarded middle place they named Midgard, the middle enclosure, the sheltered home set apart by sea and wall for the things that were yet to come, a green and quiet country waiting beneath the new turning sun and moon. And as the light moved over that empty, peaceful land, ready and waiting and still without voices, the gods had not yet finished their making, for there were as yet no people to walk in Midgard, and the sun and the moon themselves had still to be given their drivers and sent upon their endless journeys across the sky. Along the new-made shores of Midgard, where Ymir's blood still lapped as the encircling sea, and the mountains of his bones stood quiet against the dawning sky, the three brothers walked together, Odin and Vili and Vi, looking upon all that they had wrought. The world was finished and fair, yet it was empty, and as they wandered the long curve of the beach where the waves came in slow and even, they found lying upon the sand two trees, two trunks washed up from the deep, lifeless and still. One was an ash, tall and straight even in its stillness, and the other an elm, and they lay there as driftwood lies, holding within them the shape of what they might become, waiting only for breath, for warmth, for a name. The brothers paused over them, and what they did was a gift freely given. Odin bent first and breathed into them the breath of life, the spirit that stirs in every living thing, so that what had been only wood began, in some deep and quiet way, to be. Then the second of the brothers gave them wit and movement, understanding and the will to feel, the mind that wakes behind the eyes and the warmth that turns within the limbs. And the third gave them form and the fairness of living faces, and speech to shape their thoughts into words, and hearing to gather the sounds of the world, and sight to take in its colors and its light. So the two trees, lifeless on the sand, became a man and a woman, the first of all who would ever live. The man they named Ask, after the ash from which he was made, and the woman they named Embla, and these two were the parents of all humankind, the first mother and the first father of every family that would ever rise and dwell beneath the sky. To them the gods gave Midgard for their home, that green and guarded middle place ringed by the sea and watched over from above, and their Ask and Embla made their dwelling, and from them came the generations of the world, every child who would ever wake to morning and grow weary towards sleep. Let yourself rest in that thought a moment, that from two quiet trees upon a shore came all the gathered warmth of human life. Yet a home needs its turning hours, its waking and its rest, and so the gods set the heavens in their slow and certain motion. There was a giantess named Not, the night, dark-haired and deep as shadow, and she was given a chariot and a horse to draw it, and across the wide arch of the sky she rode, and where she passed the world grew dim and dewfall came, for it is said the foam from her horse's bit scatters down as the dew of morning. And Not had a son, radiant and bright where his mother was dark, and his name was Dag the Day, and he too was given a chariot and a shining horse, and he followed close behind his mother around the circle of the heavens, so that night gives way to day and day sinks again into night, on, gentle and unending. To carry the greater lights the gods chose two, whose beauty was so great it called for a place in the sky. A maiden named Sol was set to guide the chariot of the sun, holding the reins of the horses that draw the warm and golden disk across the day, and her brother Mani was given the moon to steer through the dark, marking out the months and the slow changing of its silver face. Steady and faithful they ride, Sol by day and Mani by night, keeping their appointed courses across the vault above Midgard, so that all the world below may measure time by their passing and may know, by their faithful coming and going, when to rise and when to lie down to rest. And yet they do not linger, these two bright riders, for they are not alone upon the road of the sky. Behind them run two wolves, born of an old giantess in the iron woods to the east, and the first is called Skull, who races forever after Sol and her son, his jaws stretched wide and hungering close upon her heels. And the second is Hati, who runs ahead of all and chases Mani and the moon through the long reaches of the dark. This is the reason the sun and moon never slow, never pause to rest as you may rest now, but hasten always onward across the heavens, the great wolves forever at their heels, the chase that began in the world's first morning and that will not end until the last. So the sky was given its motion, and the earth its first dwellers, and the lights ran their courses above the green fields of Midgard, while the wolves ran behind them, and all of it turned in quiet order, day and night, sun and moon, breath and rest. Yet beneath all this turning, beneath the world of gods and men and the riding lights, there stood something older and deeper still, a great tree whose roots ran down into the hidden wells of fate, holding all the worlds together in its vast and ancient branches. And it is there, to that tree and its quiet waters, that we now gently turn. You stand at the edge of all those bright and turning things, the sun in her chariot and the moon in his, the wolves forever loping behind them. And now the sky itself seems to lean, drawing your gaze downward and inward, to the still center where everything is held. For at the heart of all the worlds there grows a tree, and its name is Yggdrasil, the great ash, the mightiest and the best of all trees that ever were or will be. Picture it rising through the dark, its trunk vast beyond measure, its crown spreading so wide that it shelters the whole of creation beneath its leaves. It is the pillar that holds the cosmos together, the living frame on which all the realms are hung, and though storms of ages pass over it, it endures, ancient and green, breathing slowly in the quiet between the worlds. Down from this tree run 3 great roots, and each one reaches into a different depth, drinking from a different water. One root goes to the well of Erd, where the gods come each day to hold their council, a clear and sacred spring at the foot of the tree. Another root stretches toward the well of Mimir, where wisdom itself lies hidden in the cold, deep water, that same well where knowledge is treasured and nothing learned is ever lost. And the third root descends far down into Niflheim, the realm of mist and ice, into the bubbling spring called Ymir, the roaring kettle from which all cold rivers flow, the source of waters older than memory. So the tree is fed from 3 directions at once, by counsel and by wisdom and by the deep primordial cold, and through these waters it stands rooted in the very foundations of being. Let yourself drift now along the branches and the roots, for the tree holds the 9 realms within its vast embrace, each one a world unto itself. There is Asgard, high among the boughs, the home of the Aesir, the gods of war and sky. There is Vanaheim, the country of the Vanir, those gentler powers of the field and the sea. There is Alfheim, luminous and fair, where the light elves dwell in their soft radiance. There is Midgard, the middle enclosure, the world of men and women that you yourself know, ringed by the great sea. There is Jotunheim, the wild and rugged land of the frost giants, all crags and snow and roaring rivers. There is Svartalfheim, the dim underworld of the dark elves and the dwarves who forge their treasures in the deep stone. There is Niflheim of the mist and Muspelheim of the fire, the old realms of cold and flame from which all things began. And there is Hel, the shadowed country far below, where the dead who did not fall in battle go down to their long and silent rest. All of these the tree carries together, woven into one living whole, so that no world stands apart and none is ever truly alone. And the tree is full of life upon its great height, for many creatures make their home among its branches and its roots. High in the topmost boughs there sits an eagle, wise and far-seeing, who knows many things, and between the eagle's eyes there perches a hawk called Vedafalnir, small and keen, watching over the wind and the wide reaches of the sky. Far down among the roots there coils the dragon Nidhogg, the dread Gnawa, who chews forever at the bottom of the tree, biting at the root that runs to the cold spring, working at the wood in the dark with the slow patience of ages. And between the eagle above and the dragon below there runs a squirrel, Ratatoska, the little tooth-tusk, who scurries up and down the long trunk all day, carrying spiteful words from the one to the other, bearing the eagle's scorn down to the dragon and the dragon's grumbling back up to the eagle, so that even in the great calm of the tree there is a small and endless quarrel passing along its length. And there are the 4 stags who walk among the high branches with their necks bent back, grazing upon the tender leaves and the soft new shoots of the ash, moving slowly through the green, cropping the foliage of the tree as deer crop the grass of a meadow. So the tree is forever being eaten at, from the top by the stags and from the bottom by the dragon, gnawed and grazed and worn, and yet it lives on, healed and renewed, for it is tended with a care older than the gods themselves. That care belongs to 3 maidens who dwell beside the well of Urd, beneath the root that reaches there, and they are the Norns, the shapers of fate. The first is called Urd, who is that which has been, the past with all its done and settled deeds. The second is Verdandi, who is that which is becoming, the present moment turning even now beneath your thoughts. And the third is Skuld, who is that which shall be, the future veiled and yet to come. These 3 know the destinies of all living things, of gods and giants, and of every man and woman, and at the cradle of each life they measure out the days that are given. Each morning they draw the bright water of the well, and they take the white clay that lies about its edges, and with these they sprinkle the great ash, washing its trunk and tending its limbs, so that its branches shall not rot nor wither, so that the tree shall stand green and whole against the long wearing of time. So sacred is that water, the old tellings say, that everything which sinks into the well comes out again as white as the film within an eggshell, and the dew that falls from Yggdrasil's leaves drips down sweet as honey upon the valleys below, and the bees gather it. And so the tree stands at the still heart of everything, fed by its 3 wells, holding the 9 worlds among its boughs, watched by eagle and hawk, gnawed by the dragon, tended by the Norns, swaying gently in the great silence between the realms. Rest here a while in the shelter of its branches, in the calm of that ancient and patient strength. And as your thoughts move upward now, climbing softly along the trunk toward the highest boughs where the bright halls gleam, you come at last to the shining stronghold of the gods, to the rainbow road that leads there, and to the silent watchman who stands at its end, never sleeping, waiting in the quiet for whatever may come. Before the story carries you further, I would quietly love to know where in the world you are resting tonight and what the hour is where you are. There is nothing you need to do. Let the question drift past and sink a little deeper into the dark. The high keep of Asgard rose above all of this, lifted clear above the well and the roots, crowning the great ash like a city set upon the back of the sky. Where the Norns tended their quiet waters below, the Aesir, the bright gods of the upper air, had raised their dwelling, and from the green fields of Idavol, the plain at the heart of the stronghold. Their many halls shone outward, roofed in silver and in gold, each one the home of a god or a goddess, each one gleaming softly through the long days that knew no ending. Picture the courts of it, the smithies where they shaped their treasures in the first ages, the wide meadows where they walked together in their early gladness, before sorrow had come among them, before the first of the troubles had been spoken aloud. Asgard was the most ordered of the worlds, the place from which the others could be watched and guarded, and it stood high and serene, a fastness of the gods above the turning of all things. In the midst of it, Odin had his seat. Yggdrasil was its name, the high place, set within his hall, and when the All-Father climbed to it and took his seat upon it, his single eye could look outward across the whole of creation. From Yggdrasil, he saw into every world at once, into the homes of gods and the homes of men, into the frost-bound halls of the giants in Jotunheim and the deep ways beneath the earth. And nothing that was done under the branches of Yggdrasil was wholly hidden from him. Imagine sitting where the whole of the world lies open before you like a single wide country seen from a hilltop in the evening. The smoke of distant fires, the small movements of far-off lives, all of it gathered into one long, patient gaze. So Odin watched, and from his shoulders his two ravens, Hugin and Munin, Thought and Memory, flew out each dawn over all the lands and returned at dusk to murmur into his ear the news of everything that stirred. Among the halls of Asgard there was one greater than the rest, and its name was Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain. Its rafters were spears, and its roof was made of shields, and byrnies, the woven coats of war, lay strewn upon its benches. 500 doors and 40 more were set into its walls, each so wide that many warriors might pass through it shoulder to shoulder. Here Odin gathered to himself the bravest of those who fell in battle upon the earth, and these chosen dead were called the Einherjar, the lone fighters, the host that Odin keeps against the last of days. The Valkyries, the choosers of the slain, rode out over the fields of mortal war, and where men fell with courage, these shining maidens lifted them up and bore them home across the sky to Valhalla, to feast and to wait. Let yourself drift into the warmth of that hall, the long fires burning, the benches crowded, the easy company of those who feared nothing and now rest from all their fear. Each day the Einherjar arm themselves and ride out to the great courtyard and fight one another with all their strength, cutting and falling as they did in life. And yet when the hour of the meal comes round, they rise unhurt, every wound healed, and ride back into the hall together as friends. There they are fed without ending. A boar named Sihrimnir is cooked each evening in a great cauldron, and though the whole host eats its fill of him, by morning he is whole again, ready to be cooked once more, so that the mate never fails and no warrior goes hungry. And over the roof of Valhalla stands a goat named Heidrun, who browses upon the leaves of a certain tree, and from her udder flows not milk, but clear bright mead, enough to fill a great vat each day, enough that all the Einherjar may drink deep and never empty it. So the long ages pass for the chosen dead, in feasting and in friendly war, while they wait for the day they will be called. Now between Asgard and the lower worlds there was laid a road, and the road was a bridge, and the bridge was the rainbow itself. Bifrost the Aesir named it, the trembling, glimmering way, arching in 3 colors out of the high stronghold and down across the void toward the lands below. The wise have said it was built with great cunning out of 3 things woven together, out of fire and out of air and out of water, and that the red you see burning along it is the fire that keeps it whole, so that the frost giants and the mountain giants may not climb it to fall upon the gods. Imagine standing at the foot of that shining ark as it lifts away into the heights, its colors deep and clear and faintly warm, the most beautiful of all bridges and the strongest. And yet, for all its strength, a thing the gods knew would one day break beneath a weight too great for it to bear. Where Bifrost meets the edge of heaven there stands a watchman, and his name is Heimdall. He dwells in a hall called Himinjorg, the cliffs of heaven. Hard by the bridge he guards, and there he keeps his unsleeping watch at the border of the gods. A strange and wondrous birth was his, for it is told that 9 mothers bore him, 9 sisters together, and from them he took a strength and a keenness beyond all the other gods. He needs less sleep than a bird upon a branch. He can see for 100 leagues by night as well as by day, as clearly in the dark as in the light of morning. And his hearing is keener still, so fine that he can hear the wool growing upon the backs of the sheep in the meadows, and the grass itself growing in the earth, and every small whisper and footfall in all the quiet of the worlds. Few things, surely, could ever come upon the bridge unmarked by such a guardian. White is Heimdall called, the brightest of the gods, and his teeth are of gold, and he rides a horse named Gulltop, golden-maned. Beside him he keeps a horn, and the horn has a name, Horn, the resounding horn, the loud-crying horn, and it waits there at the bridgehead. For the 1 hour it was made to answer. For Heimdall holds it ready, and on the day that danger comes at last against Asgard, when the enemies of the gods come riding up the rainbow road, he will set it to his lips and blow a blast so great that it will be heard through all the 9 realms, and every god will wake, and every Einherjar will rise. But that hour is not yet, and far off, and the horn rests silent. So Heimdall watches at the edge of heaven through the long peace, while behind him the bright halls stand, and the gods go about their days in Asgard, not yet troubled by what is to come. Yet even in these early ages the Aesir were not the only powers in the worlds, for far across the void there dwelt another kindred of gods, the Vanir of the fertile fields, and between these 2 great houses there was soon to be a reckoning. Picture now the long, slow turning of years after Heimdall took up his horn upon the rainbow's edge, for the watchman did not guard against giants alone, and before the bridge was ever crossed by an enemy there came a stranger conflict, a wound that opened within the family of the gods themselves. For you must know that the divine ones were not 1 people but 2 kindreds shaped by different gifts and different longings. There were the Aesir, the gods of Asgard, warlike and proud, keepers of oaths and of battle, lovers of wisdom won through hardship, with Odin at their head and Thor with his strength and Tyr with his courage. And there were the Vanir, an older and gentler kindred who dwelt apart in Vanaheim, gods of the soil and the sea, of harvest and rain and the quiet fertility of the earth, who knew the secrets of growth and of seething magic, and who poured their blessings upon fields and flocks and the swelling of the tide. Into the halls of the Aesir there came a being called Gullveig, and her name carried the gleam of gold, for she seemed wrought of greed and of glittering desire, and wherever she walked, she stirred a hunger in the hearts of those who looked upon her. The Aesir grew uneasy at the spell she cast, at the lust for gold she kindled, and in their anger they seized her and raised their spears against her, and they cast her into the fire to burn. Yet the flames could not hold her. 3 times they burned Gullveig in the high hall, and 3 times she rose again from the embers, reborn and whole and unbroken, walking out of the ashes as though fire were only a kind of sleep. Some say she took then the name Hyde, the Bright One, a wandering seeress skilled in the dark arts of Seath, working her charms among the people of the world. But the burning could not be undone, and the doing of it could not be forgiven. For the Vanir reckoned this killing a grievous wrong, an injury done to one of their own kind, and from this single spark the first war in all the world was kindled. Let yourself sink into the strangeness of that thought, that before any nation of men took up arms against another, the very gods were already at war, the 2 great families of the divine arrayed against each other across the wide fields of the sky. The Aesir made ready behind their new-built walls, and the Vanir came against them with the slow, patient power of growing things, with magic that the warlike gods could neither match nor wholly understand. Odin, ever the leader in battle, lifted his great spear and hurled it out over the gathered host, flinging it across the heads of the enemy in the ancient way that dedicates a foe to slaughter and claims the war for one's own. And so the fighting began, but the war would not be won. The Aesir broke the walls of the Vanir, and the Vanir trampled down the fields of the Aesir, and back and forth the tide of conflict surged, with neither side able to bend the other to defeat. The Vanir's seething sorcery met the Aesir's iron strength, and the 2 powers were so evenly matched that the struggle dragged on without end, each victory answered by a loss, each gain undone, until both kindreds grew weary of the wounding and saw that this endless contest would only spend their strength against itself. And so, at last, they wearied of war, and they laid down their weapons, and they came together to speak of peace. To seal the truce between them, the gods of both kindreds performed an old and solemn rite. They drew near to a great vat, and one by one the Aesir and the Vanir each spat into it, mingling their spittle together as a pledge that the peace would hold, that the 2 families were now bound as one. And the gods, unwilling to let so precious a token of harmony be wasted, took the mingled spittle and shaped from it a living being, and they called him Kvasir. He was the wisest of all beings ever made, for there was no question that could be put to him that he could not answer, and he wandered far and wide throughout the worlds, teaching wisdom to whoever would receive it, the very spirit of peace made flesh. Yet his story would carry a darker turning in days to come, when his blood would become the mead of poets, but that telling waits for another hour. To bind the peace more closely still, the 2 kindreds agreed upon an exchange of hostages, each sending its own to dwell among the other, so that trust might grow between them through nearness. From Vanaheim came the sea god Njord, lord of the wind and the waves and the wealth that comes from the deep, master of harbors and the calm that follows storm, and with him came his 2 fair children. There was Freya, the bright god of sunshine and rain and the fruitful earth, who would become beloved among the Aesir for the peace and plenty he brought. And there was Freyja, his sister, the most beautiful of all the goddesses, mistress of love and of seething magic, who rode in a chariot drawn by cats and wept tears of red gold, and who knew the deepest arts of the Vanir. These three came to Asgard and were welcomed and given honor, and Njord and his children dwelt thereafter among the Aesir as if they had always belonged. And in return, the Aesir sent two of their own to live in Vanaheim. They sent Honia, a tall and handsome god, fair to look upon and noble in his bearing, a figure who seemed in every way fit to lead and to counsel. And with him they sent Mimir, wisest among the Aesir, a being whose knowledge ran deep as the roots of the world, that he might guide the Vanir with his counsel and be a worthy gift in the trade. The Vanir received them gladly, and seeing the stately grace of Honia, made him a chief among them, setting him in places of judgment where wisdom was needed. Yet a flaw lay hidden in this gift, and slowly the Vanir came to see it. For whenever Honia sat in their councils, and a hard question was laid before him, a matter that called for true judgment, he would turn always to Mimir at his side and wait for the wise one to speak, and Mimir would whisper the counsel that should be given. But when Mimir was not there, when Honia stood alone before some weighty choice, the handsome god would only shrug his shoulders and say that others must decide, for he could give no answer of his own. Again and again it happened, until the Vanir understood that without Mimir the noble Honia was an empty vessel, all fair seeming and no wisdom within, and they grew bitter, believing they had been cheated in the bargain, given a hollow figurehead, while the Aesir kept the better share. In their anger the Vanir turned upon Mimir, and they seized the wisest of the Aesir and struck off his head, and they sent that head back to Asgard as their grim answer to the trade they thought unfair. Imagine the sorrow of Odin when this gift was laid before him, for of all beings Mimir was the one whose counsel he valued most, and now only the silenced head remained. Yet Odin would not let so great a wisdom pass away into death. He took the head of Mimir and treated it with rare herbs so that it would not rot or wither, and he sang over it potent charms and spoke the words of power, until the breath of speech returned to those cold lips. And so the head of Mimir lived on, preserved and waking, able still to speak in secret to the All-Father, to tell him hidden things and counsel him in the dark days to come. In this way the long war ended not in ruin, but in a deeper binding, the two kindreds woven now into one, their gods dwelling together within the walls of Asgard. And it was those very walls, and the strange bargain by which they had been raised so high and strong, that would soon become a tale of their own. The Vanir gods Njord and Freyja had settled now among the Aesir, and Freyja too had come to dwell in Asgard, bringing her beauty and her arts. And so it was that, in those early days, when the war was ended and the realms were learning to live as one, the gods turned their thoughts to the safety of their high home. For Asgard, though fair, stood open and unguarded, and the giants of Jotunheim looked upon it with hungry eyes. It was in this time of uneasy peace that a stranger came riding to the gates, a great broad-shouldered smith who named himself a master builder, and he offered to raise a wall around Asgard so strong and so high that no frost giant nor mountain troll could ever break through it. Picture the gods gathered to hear him, leaning close, as he spoke of ramparts that would stand through every age, of stone fitted to stone so cunningly that no enemy could find a crack to climb. The work he promised was beyond anything they could raise themselves, and they listened, half wondering, as his price was named. For he asked no small wage. He would have Freyja for his bride, the fairest of all the goddesses, and with her he would take the sun and the moon out of the sky. And he swore he would finish the whole of it in a single winter, the wall complete before the first day of summer came. The gods drew back at such a price, and they would have sent him away, but Loki, ever quick with a clever word, leaned in among them and urged them to a bargain. Let him try, Loki said, but bind him to terms he could never meet. Give him but one winter, and if so much as a single stone stood unfinished on the first day of summer, he would forfeit all his wage and go away with nothing. And let it be sworn that no man would lend him a hand in the labor, that he must work alone. The gods thought this a safe and shrewd thing, for what builder could raise a wall around all of Asgard in 3 short months with no help at all? And so they agreed, and oaths were sworn between them, and the strange smith asked only that he might have the use of his stallion, a horse named Svadilfari, to bear the stones. To this small thing the gods consented, on Loki's counsel, and the bargain was sealed. Yet they had not reckoned on the horse. When the work began, in the first dark days of winter, the gods watched in growing unease, for Svadilfari was no common beast. Through the long nights, the stallion hauled stone after enormous stone, boulders so vast that the giant himself could scarcely have moved them, and the horse dragged them up to the walls as though they were no weight at all. By day the builder set them in their courses, and by night the stallion brought more, and the work that the gods had thought impossible rose swiftly before their eyes. The wall climbed higher and higher, broad and seamless and strong, and as the winter wore on toward its end, it became plain to all who watched that the builder would finish in time after all. 3 days only remained before the first day of summer, and the great work was all but done, wanting only the stones above the gateway. Then a cold fear ran through the Aesir, for they saw what they had bound themselves to give. Freyja would be carried off to Jotunheim, and the sky itself would be left dark and empty, the sun and the moon gone from the heavens forever. And in their anger and their dread, they turned, all of them, to the one who had urged the bargain upon them. They came to Loki with hard words and harder threats, and they swore that he would die an evil death if he did not find some way to cheat the builder of his wage. For it was his counsel that had brought them to this pass, and his cunning that must now undo it. So Loki, fearing for himself, swore by oaths that he would so contrive things that the builder should never win his price, whatever it might cost him. And when evening came again, and the builder went out with Svadilfari to haul stone as he did each night, Loki was waiting in the woods along the way. He had changed his shape, as was his strange power, and there in the dusk he stood transformed into a mare, a sleek and graceful mare, and he ran out whinnying before the great stallion. Picture Svadilfari catching the scent of her on the cold air, and how the horse broke from his harness and bolted after her into the trees. All that night the builder ran behind, shouting and cursing, trying to catch his stallion, but the mare led him a wild chase through the dark forest, on, and no stone at all was hauled to Asgard that night. When morning came, the builder saw that the work could not be finished in the time that was left, and his fury rose up in him so fierce and so terrible that he could no longer keep his shape hidden. The mask of the master smith fell away, and he stood revealed at last for what he truly was, a giant of Jotunheim come in disguise to steal away the goddess and the lights of the sky. And when the Aesir saw that they had been dealing with one of their old enemies, all their oaths and scruples fell away, for the bargain had been made under a falsehood. They called for Thor, who had been away in the east fighting trolls, and the thunder god came striding home with his hammer in his hand. One blow of Mjolnir he gave, and that was the giant's wage, for it shattered his skull and sent him down to the cold halls of Niflheim, and not the sun nor the moon nor Freyja did he ever take. Yet the night's strange work was not without its fruit. For Loki had run as a mare through the wild dark, and in time, when the seasons had turned, he bore a foal of his own. It was a grey colt, unlike any other in all the worlds, for it had 8 legs, and it could run over the sea and through the air as easily as over the land, swifter than any horse that ever lived. Loki brought this wondrous creature to Odin, and the colt was named Sleipnir, and it became the All-Father's own steed, the horse that carried him between the worlds, down the long roads to hell and back, wherever his wandering will should take him. And so the wall of Asgard stood finished, strong and high, though built at last by other hands than the giants, and the gods kept their goddess and their sky. But Odin, riding now upon his 8-legged steed, was not content only to be safe behind walls. There were deeper things he hungered to know, secrets hidden in the roots of the world and in the wells beneath the great tree. And for such wisdom he would pay a price as strange and as dear as any builder's wage. Let yourself drift now toward those quiet waters, where the All-Father bent low to learn what only sacrifice could teach. The endless hunger for wisdom never left Odin, not even after Sleipnir was born and Asgard stood ringed in its great wall. And so the All-Father turned his thoughts inward and outward at once. Knowing that strength alone could never hold back the doom he sensed gathering at the edges of the worlds. He had shaped the earth and set the lights in the sky. He had raised halls and walls and gathered warriors to him, and yet a quiet restlessness moved beneath all of it, a knowing that there were things hidden from even the highest of the gods, secrets folded into the roots of the world tree, truths that no throne could summon and no army could seize. And so Odin set out, as he so often did, wrapped in a traveller's cloak with his hat pulled low, walking the long roads between the realms not as a king, but as a seeker, willing to go wherever knowledge might be found, and to pay whatever such knowledge might cost. Picture the great ash Yggdrasil spreading through all the worlds, its branches lifting into the heavens, and its 3 vast roots reaching down into separate depths. And beneath one of those roots, in a still and shadowed place, lies a well whose waters hold wisdom and understanding gathered since the beginning of things. This is Mimir's well, and Mimir is its keeper, the wisest of all beings, who drinks each morning from those waters and carries within him knowledge deeper than any other, knowledge of what was and what is yet to come. The well lies quiet there in the dimness beneath the root, its surface dark and smooth as polished stone, and to come to it is to come to the very source of knowing, to the place where the hidden things of the worlds rest beneath still water, waiting. To this well Odin came, down through the long roots and the cool gloom, and he stood at its edge and looked into the dark water and asked Mimir for a single draught, one drink from the well of wisdom. And Mimir, keeper of the depths, did not refuse him outright, for the wise do not give wisdom freely, and he answered that such a drink was not had for nothing, that the waters carried a price worthy of what they held. Let yourself feel the weight of that moment, the All-Father standing at the edge of the dark well, already lord of so much, and yet understanding that to gain this he must give something he could never take back. The price Mimir named was an eye, one of Odin's own eyes, surrendered into the well as the cost of the draught. And Odin did not turn away. He lifted his hand to his own face and gave up his eye, plucking it free and casting it down into the dark waters where it sank and settled among the hidden things. And there it remains, gleaming softly in the depths of Mimir's well, the price of wisdom paid and left behind forever. Then he bent and drank, and the cool waters of understanding passed into him, and with that single draught he took into himself a knowledge deeper than any he had held before, an understanding of the worlds and their workings and the long shape of fate that no other god possessed. From that day onward, the All-Father was one-eyed, and his single gaze became the mark of all he had given to know what he now knew, the visible sign of a god who had traded sight for insight, who had sacrificed a part of himself to see further than any eye alone could see. Yet even this was not enough, for the deepest wisdom of all lay further still, hidden in a place that no road could reach and no well could offer, and to win it Odin gave himself not to another but to himself. Imagine the All-Father coming again to Yggdrasil, the great tree at the center of all things, and there, alone, mounting up into its branches and binding himself fast, hanging upon the windswept tree, pierced through by the point of his own spear Gungnir. So he hung, given to himself, a sacrifice offered by the god to the god, no one beneath him to receive it, and no one above him to grant it, only Odin alone in the high branches, with the long winds moving through the leaves around him. 9 nights he hung there, swaying in the cold, and through all that time he neither ate the bread that none brought him nor drank from any horn, taking no comfort and no easing of his ordeal, only the slow turning of the nights and the deepening of his pain, and the long patience of one who waits at the very edge of himself. He looked downward as he hung, down into the shadowed depths below the tree, into the dark from which all hidden things rise, and he gave himself wholly to the waiting, letting go of all else, peering ever deeper into that darkness for the thing he had come to find. And there, in the depth of that long ordeal, when he had given everything and held back nothing, the runes rose up to him out of the deep. Picture them appearing at last in the darkness below, the runes, the secret signs in which the deepest powers of the worlds are written, the shapes that hold within them the magic of speaking and shaping and binding, of healing and turning fate aside. Odin saw them, and reaching down with the last of his strength he took them up, seized them screaming, crying out in the depth of his pain and his triumph as he grasped the runes and made them his own. Then he fell back from the tree, loosed at last from his long hanging, falling down out of the branches with the runes won and held fast within him, and the ordeal was ended, and the prize was his. And so Odin returned, no longer only the lord of Asgard, but the master of the runes, carrying with him the secret signs and the songs of power that rose from them, the spells that could turn a blade aside or quiet a storm or wake the dead to speak. He had paid for this with an eye cast into a well and with 9 nights hung upon the tree, with hunger and thirst and the spear's long wound. And now he held what such suffering had bought, the deep magic of the worlds gathered into his keeping. This wisdom he did not hoard alone, but shared and used, teaching its songs and working its spells, weaving the runes into the long labor of holding back the doom he had glimpsed in the well's dark water. And ever the seeker, ever hungry for one more secret, one more draught of knowing, Odin would turn his single eye toward yet another treasure of the wise, toward a certain mead brewed far away in which all poetry and all eloquence was said to be held, a drink that any god might long to taste. There you came to rest, the riddle answered, the runes shrieked up and gathered into your keeping, and from that knowledge a stranger hunger followed, for wisdom alone is silent until it learns to sing. And so the story turns now toward the sweetest of all stolen things, the mead that makes a poet of whoever tastes it. Let yourself drift back to the early days, when the 2 great families of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir, had ended their long quarrel and sealed their peace. And to mark that truce, each of them stepped forward and spat into a single vessel, mingling their spittle as a sign that no anger remained between them. From that shared token the gods would not let so fine a thing go to waste, and so they shaped it into a living being, and they called him Kvasir, and into him passed something of the wisdom of both kindreds. Picture Kvasir walking out across the wide roads of the worlds, gentle and quiet-spoken, for there was no question anyone could ask him that he could not answer, no knot of thought so tangled that he could not loosen it with a few soft words. He went from hall to hall and from land to land, teaching whoever wished to learn, and wherever he passed, he left people wiser than he found them. And for a long while, it seemed the world had grown kinder for his presence. Yet wisdom that wanders freely makes some hearts not grateful but greedy, and there were 2 dwarfs, brothers named Fjalla and Galla, who looked upon Kvasir and saw not a teacher, but a treasure they might keep for themselves. They invited him in beneath the earth, into their dark and clever workshop, speaking warm words of welcome, and there, when he suspected nothing, they killed him. And being cunning past all mercy, they let his blood run out and caught every drop, and they mixed it with honey in 2 great vats and a kettle, and they brewed from it a mead unlike any other. Whoever drank even a little of it would wake to find verses on the tongue and understanding in the mind, would become a poet or a scholar, able to speak in measures that moved the heart. When the other gods came asking what had become of Kvasir, the dwarfs answered smoothly that he had simply choked on his own wisdom, for no one living was clever enough to drain him with questions, and so the murder lay hidden a while beneath that easy lie. But the dwarfs were not done with their cruelty, for cunning untempered by kindness turns at last against itself. They invited an old giant named Gilling to row out with them upon the sea, and out where the water ran deep, they steered the boat onto a hidden rock and tipped it over. And Gilling, who could not swim, sank and drowned while the dwarfs clung to the hull and righted it and rowed home untroubled. Then they sent word to Gilling's wife that her husband was dead, and when she came weeping to the door, Her grief filled the small house with her crying, until Yggdrasil grew weary of the sound and asked if it would ease her heart to look out upon the sea where he had died. As she passed beneath the doorway, Gala dropped a millstone upon her head, and so she too was slain, and the brothers thought themselves wonderfully clever. Yet word travels even into the mountains. Suttung, the son of Gilling, learned how his father and mother had been killed, and he came for the dwarfs in cold fury, and he seized them and carried them out to a skerry, a low reef that the rising tide would soon cover, and there he left them to drown as his father had drowned. The dwarfs, with the water already climbing their legs, begged for their lives, and they offered him the one thing they owned that was worth a giant's mercy, the precious mead brewed from Kvasir's blood, as the blood price for his parents. Suttung accepted, and he took the dwarfs back to shore, and he carried the mead away to his own home in the mountains. He hid it deep within a great stone called Yggdrasil, in a hollow chamber far inside the rock where no thief could come, and he set his own daughter, Gunnlod, to sit beside it and guard it, and there the sweetest draught in all the worlds lay sealed in the dark beneath the mountain. Word of such a treasure could not stay secret forever, and it reached at last the ear of Odin, who had given an eye and hung upon the tree for wisdom, and who now desired this mead more keenly than any jewel, for it was the very essence of poetry itself, and he set his mind to win it. He went down into the world of giants disguised, calling himself Baldr, which means worker of evil, and he came upon a field where 9 thralls were mowing hay for a giant named Borgi, who was Suttung's brother. Odin took out a whetstone and sharpened their scythes until the blades cut as if through air, and the thralls marveled and each wished to own the stone. And Odin tossed it up among them so that all 9 grabbed for it at once, and in their grasping, their keen scythes swept across one another's throats, and every one of them fell dead in the grass. So Borgi was left without laborers at the height of the season, and when Baldr offered to do the work of all 9 men through the summer in exchange for a single drink of Suttung's mead, the giant, having no other hands, agreed to ask his brother on the stranger's behalf. All season long Odin labored as no 9 men ever had, and when the harvest was gathered, he came to claim his wage. But Suttung refused outright and would not give up so much as a drop. And so Baldr and Borgi went together to the mountain, and Odin drew out an auger named Rati and bade the giant bore a hole through the living rock. Borgi drilled and claimed the way was open, but Odin blew into the hole, and the stone dust flew back at him, and he knew the giant lied. And so Borgi bored again until the passage pierced clean through. Then Odin changed his shape and became a serpent and slipped into the narrow opening, and Borgi stabbed down with the auger to kill him, but the serpent was already gone, gliding deep into the heart of Yggdrasil. There in the chamber sat Gunnlod beside the 3 vessels of mead, and Odin took again his own fair shape, and he stayed with her 3 nights, and she, won by his words and his company, granted him 3 drinks of the mead as the price of those 3 nights. But when his turn came, he drank not in sips, but in vast swallows, and in the first he emptied 1 whole vat to its dregs, and in the second another, and in the third he drained the kettle, so that with 3 draughts he took all the mead there was. Then he became an eagle and burst up out of the mountain, and beat his great wings toward Asgard, with Suttung roaring behind him in eagle shape of his own. And the gods, seeing him come, set out their vessels to catch the precious draught. Odin spat the mead into them for the keeping of the gods and the gift of all worthy poets. And so song came into the world, while in the halls of the thunder another power was waking, the rolling strength of mighty Thor and the hammer he would one day lose. If you are still here, somewhere out in the night, picture for a moment all the others listening with you in distant rooms and far cities, each of them letting the day go, just as you are now. The mead of poetry had passed from the mountain into the world, and the gift of inspired words now belonged to gods and to the worthiest of mortals. Yet of all the Aesir there was one who needed no honeyed verses to make himself known, for his voice was the storm itself. Let yourself drift now toward him, toward Thor, the thunder god, son of Odin the All-Father and of Jord, who is the broad green earth herself, so that in him the high cunning of the sky and the deep steadiness of the soil were joined in a single mighty frame. He was the strongest of all who dwelt in Asgard, and the defender of both the gods and the children of Midgard. And when the giants of Jotunheim grew bold and threatened the ordered world, it was Thor who stood between them and ruin. Picture his great red beard, his eyes bright with sudden lightning, and the rumble that went before him like a promise of rain. He bore with him things of power that made his strength greater still. Upon his hands he wore iron gloves, that he might grasp what no bare hand could hold, and about his waist he buckled the belt of strength called Medjingjord, and whenever he girded himself with it, his already great might swelled to twice its measure. Across the heavens he rode in a chariot drawn by 2 goats, and the turning of its wheels upon the clouds was the very thunder that mortals heard rolling above their roofs. Yet the greatest of his treasures, the one most feared in every realm where giants brooded, was his hammer Mjolnir, which never missed its mark when it was thrown, and which always returned to his hand of its own accord. The making of that hammer was a strange tale born out of mischief. Loki, ever restless, had once cut away the golden hair of Sif, Thor's wife, and to escape Thor's fury, he swore to bring her hair of true gold and treasures besides. So Loki went down among the dwarves, the master smiths who labor beneath the mountains, and there he set the dwarf brothers Brokkr and Sindri to a wager, staking his own head that they could not forge gifts finer than those of other dwarves. Into their forge Sindri laid iron, and bade his brother Brokkr work the bellows without pause, for if the blast should fail, the work would be ruined. Loki, who could not bear to lose, took the shape of a fly and bit at the dwarf to break his rhythm. He stung his hand, and then his neck, and the patient Brokkr bore it. But as the last and greatest piece took shape within the fire, Loki, the fly, settled upon Brokkr's eyelid and bit so deep that blood ran down and blinded him, and for a single moment the dwarf loosed the bellows to wipe his eye. In that moment the handle of the hammer came out short, shorter than Sindri had meant it to be, though in every other way the weapon was flawless. So it was that Mjolnir, mightiest of all the gods' possessions, carried forever a haft a little too brief for its head, a small mark left by Loki's malice upon a perfect thing. Now this hammer was Thor's surest shield against the giants, and so you may imagine the dread that filled him on the morning he woke and reached for it and found it gone. He searched, and it was nowhere. The great Mjolnir had been stolen out of Asgard itself. In his alarm, he sought out Loki, and together they learned the truth. For word came from Jotunheim of the giant Thrym, lord of the frost giants, who had hidden the hammer deep beneath the earth, 8 leagues down where no god could reach it. And Thrym set his price. He would yield Mjolnir for nothing less than the hand of Freyja, fairest of all the goddesses, who must come to him as his bride. When this demand was carried to Freyja, her answer was anger, swift and bright. She would not go. So fierce was her refusal, so great her wrath at being bartered like cattle to a giant, that she trembled with rage. And as she shook, her famed necklace Brisingamen, the golden treasure of the Vanir, quivered and shone upon her breast and burst from its clasp to the floor. She was a goddess of love and of war both, and no creature of frost would have her against her will. The gods gathered in council, troubled, for without Mjolnir all the realms lay open to the giants. It was Heimdall, the keen-eyed watchman who sees far into things both near and distant, who devised the cunning plan. Since Thrym waited for a bride he should have. Let Thor himself be dressed as Freyja, veiled and gowned, with the necklace Brisingamen about his neck, and a wreath of keys at his side, and a fine linen veil drawn down to hide his face. Thor balked at this, for it shamed his pride to go in women's weeds, yet Loki reminded him that without the hammer, the giants would soon hold Asgard, and so the Thunderer yielded. And Loki, ever the trickster, dressed himself as the handmaiden, the bridesmaid who would travel at the false Freyja's side and speak for her where her own voice could not. So the two set out, and the goats drew the chariot across the sky to Jotunheim, where Thrym rejoiced to see his bride at last arriving, and bade his hall be made ready and a great feast laid. Yet at that feast the disguise was sorely tried, for Thor's hunger was the hunger of a god, and beneath the veil he devoured an entire ox, and then ate 8 whole salmon, and drank down 3 casks of mead, while the giants watched in wonder. Thrym marveled that any maiden could eat so, but Loki, quick as ever, leaned close and explained that fair Freyja had been so wild with longing for Thrym that for 8 nights she had not eaten at all, and so her hunger now was the measure of her love. And when Thrym lifted the veil to steal a kiss, and started back at the eyes that blazed beneath it like burning coals, Loki murmured again that the maiden had not slept for 8 nights either, so feverish was her desire, and that the fire in her gaze was only the heat of that longing. So the giant was soothed, and his suspicion melted away. Then, in his gladness, Thrym called for the hammer to be brought out, that it might be laid in the bride's lap to hallow the marriage, as the old custom required, and so seal the vows between them. And when Mjolnir was carried in and set upon the knees of the veiled figure, the heart of Thor laughed within him. His hand closed about the short handle that Loki's mischief had once made, and he rose up in his full and dreadful strength. The veil fell away, and the thunder god stood revealed, and the first to feel the hammer was Thrym himself, struck down in the moment of his triumph, and after him the whole company of giants gathered in that hall, until the wedding feast became a field of the slain. So Mjolnir came home to Asgard, and the order of the worlds was kept a little longer. Yet the giants did not cease to test that order, and the duels between Thor and the great enemies of the gods were far from ended. For there waited in the wide, cold reaches of the east a stranger journey still, into a hall of riddles and illusions, and out upon a dark and heaving sea, where the thunderer would cast his line for the greatest of all his foes. Picture Thor not resting, for the storm god is rarely still, and soon enough another road opens before him, this one leading east into Jotunheim, the cold and tumbled land of the giants. He sets out with Loki at his side, and the goat-drawn chariot rolling behind, and along the way they take in two young servants, the brother and sister Thjalfi and Roskva, children of a farmer whose household Thor had visited. They walk until the light fails and the great dark woods close around them, and there, in the failing dusk, they come upon a strange and enormous hall, its entrance as wide as the building itself, and being weary, they go inside and lie down to sleep. In the deep of the night, the ground trembles and a great noise rolls through the dark, and the four of them retreat into a smaller side chamber off the main room, where Thor sits at the threshold gripping the handle of Mjolnir, watching through the night. When morning comes, they go out and find the cause of the shaking. Nearby lies a giant, vast beyond reckoning, fast asleep and snoring, and the snoring is the very thunder that had shaken the woods. And the hall in which they had sheltered, they now see plainly, is no hall at all, but the giant's enormous glove, the smaller side chamber only the space for the thumb. The giant wakes and names himself Skrymir, and offers to travel with them, and Thor agrees. Skrymir gathers all their provisions into his own great knapsack, and strides ahead with steps so long that they can scarcely keep pace. When evening comes, he lies down beneath an oak to sleep, telling them to help themselves to food. But though Thor pulls and strains with all his strength at the straps of the knapsack, he cannot loosen a single knot. Anger rises in him, and he takes up Mjolnir and brings it down upon the sleeping giant's head. Skrymir stirs and asks whether a leaf has fallen on him. Twice more in the night Thor strikes, blows that would split mountains, and each time the giant only murmurs that an acorn, perhaps, or a twig has dropped from the branches above. In the morning, Skrymir points the way onward to the stronghold called Utgard, warns them mildly that the men there are larger still, and goes off on his own road. So they come to Utgard, a fortress so high they must bend back their necks to see its top, and they slip between the bars of its gate into the hall of the king, Utgard Loki, who greets them with cool scorn and asks what feat each of them can perform, for none may stay who has no skill to show. Loki, hungry from the road, boasts that no one can eat faster than he, and a trough of meat is set down, and a fellow named Logi takes the far end. They meet in the middle, but Loki has eaten only the meat, while Logi has devoured the meat, the bones, and the trough itself, and Loki is judged beaten. Then young Thjalfi, swiftest of runners, races against a slight figure named Hugi, and 3 times he runs, and 3 times Hugi turns back to meet him before the course is done. Then it is Thor's turn, and he asks for drink, and a long horn is brought, the kind the giants empty in 1 draught, or in 2, or in 3 at the most. Thor sets his lips to it and drinks a great and mighty draught, and lowers it certain he has drained it, yet the level has barely fallen. Twice more he drinks, deep and long, until his breath fails, and still the horn is scarcely lower than before. Utgard Loki suggests, almost gently, that perhaps the mighty Thor is weaker than they had heard and offers a simpler task, to lift his house cat from the floor. Thor reaches beneath the grey cat and heaves upward with all his terrible strength, but only one paw leaves the ground, the great arched back rising and rising as he strains. Stung now, he demands someone to wrestle, and the king laughs and calls in his old nurse, a withered crone named Ellie, and though Thor grips her with all his might, she does not bend, and the harder he struggles, the firmer she stands, until at last she forces him down onto one knee. In the morning, Utgard Loki himself walks with them out beyond the gates, and there, where his stronghold can no longer trick them, he tells the truth. He was Skrymir, and the knapsack had been bound with iron wire, and the 3 hammer blows had fallen not on his head, but on a hilltop nearby, which Thor may see is now cloven by 3 deep square valleys. Loki had striven against Logi, who is wildfire itself, devouring all things. Thjalfi had raced against Hugi, who is thought, and nothing runs swifter than thought. The horn's far end had been sunk in the open sea, and Thor's drinking had pulled the very tides down so far that ever after the oceans ebb and flow. The grey cat was no cat, but Jormungand, the Midgard serpent that circles all the world, and when one paw rose, the giants had watched in terror, as the sky itself seemed near to its edge. And the old woman, Ellie, was old age, which no one living has ever thrown, and against whom even Thor could do no more than sink to a single knee. So near had he come, the king says, that never again will he let Thor inside his walls. Thor lifts Mjolnir in fury to strike him down at last, but Utgard Loki is gone, and the stronghold with him, and there is only a wide and empty plain. Yet the serpent that wore the shape of a cat had taken hold in Thor's mind, and it draws him out again upon the sea. He goes in the guise of a young man to lodge with the giant Ymir, and at dawn presses to join him fishing. Ymir grants it grudgingly and bids him find his own bait, so Thor strides to the giant's herd, seizes the greatest ox, and wrenches off its head to hang upon his hook. They row out far past Hymir's usual grounds, past the place where the giant pulls up 2 whales at once, and still Thor rows on into the deep waters where the world serpent lies coiled. There he casts the ox head down, and Jormungand takes the bait, and the hook bites fast in its jaw. The serpent thrashes, and the sea boils, and Thor braces with such force that his feet drive through the bottom of the boat to the seabed below, and he hauls the monstrous head up out of the waves at last, eye glaring against eye, venom dripping, the 2 ancient enemies face to face. He lifts the hammer to strike, but Ymir, white with terror that the sea itself will swallow them, cuts the line, and Jormungand sinks back into the dark where it waits, its hour not yet come. So the serpent slides once more beneath the world, one of 3 monstrous children whose stories began far off in a giantess's hall, where another of Loki's offspring was even then growing toward a doom the gods could not escape. The slaying of the great serpent was only one of the troubles that Loki's blood would one day bring upon the gods, for far below the surface of Thor's adventures there moved a deeper current, and it carried the name of Loki himself. He walked among the Aesir as one of them, and Odin had taken him as a blood brother in the old binding way, so that the All-Father had sworn never to drink unless Loki too were offered the cup. Yet Loki was not truly of Asgard. His father was the giant Farborti, whose name means the cruel striker, and something of the storm lived always in his son. He was handsome and quick-tongued, the most cunning of all who sat at the long tables, and there was no shape he could not slip into when it suited him, no riddle he could not turn, no door he could not talk his way through. He could be a friend when friendship served him, and he had pulled the gods out of more than one tangle with his wit. But the same cleverness that saved them could just as easily undo them, and beneath the laughter there was always something that did not love what it served. Picture him slipping away from the bright halls and crossing into Jotunheim, into the cold country of the giants, where he took for his own a giantess named Angerboda, whose name means the one who brings grief. In the shadowed places of that land, she bore him 3 children, and they were not children like any others. They came into the world already strange, already vast with a wrongness the gods could feel even from far away, and word of them travelled to Asgard on the wind. The wise among the Aesir went to the prophecies and the deep sayings, and what they read there filled them with dread, for it was foretold that these 3 would one day bring great harm to gods and men alike, that from this brood the ending of the world would draw some of its strength. And so the gods resolved that they would not leave such creatures to grow unwatched in the wild lands of the giants. Odin had the 3 brought before him. The first was Jormungand, the serpent, and even young he was a thing of terrible length. The Allfather took him and cast him out into the deep sea that lies coiled around all the lands of men. And there in the cold green dark the serpent grew and grew until he stretched the whole way round the world and could close his own tail within his jaws. So he lay, the world circling one, holding Midgard in his ring, and it is he that Thor had hooked upon his line in the giant's boat, the 2 old enemies recognizing each other across the water. The second child was Hel, a daughter half living and half dead, one side of her fair as any maiden, and the other side dark and fallen as a corpse. Her Odin sent down into the mist below the worlds, into Niflheim, and gave into her keeping the whole realm of the dead who do not fall in battle, a great cold house where she rules over all who come to her, and none who enter there come easily back into the light. But the third child the gods kept among themselves, thinking perhaps that what they raised by their own hands they might tame. This was Fenrir, the wolf. While he was small, they fed him within the very courts of Asgard and watched him, and at first it seemed almost that they might be right. Yet he grew, and the growing did not stop. Each day he was larger than the day before, and fiercer, and the gods began to remember the prophecies and to glance at one another over the great hungry shape that lay among them. Soon his size and his temper were such that there was only one of all the Aesir brave enough to go near him and set down his food, and that was Tyr, the bravest of them, who alone would walk to the wolf and feed him from his own hand without flinching. When the gods could no longer pretend the wolf was safe, they resolved to bind him, but they were unwilling to do open violence within their sanctuary, and so they chose to deceive him instead. They made a strong fetter of iron called lading and brought it to Fenrir as though it were a game, a test of his strength, challenging him to see whether he could break free. The wolf looked at the chain, judged it weak, and let them lock it upon him, and then with a single straining of his limbs he snapped it as if it were nothing and stood loose among them. The gods praised him and hid their unease. They forged a second fetter, twice as strong, called Dromi, and again they coaxed him, telling him that to break so mighty a chain would make his name famous through all the worlds. Fenrir saw that this one was far stronger, yet his hunger for glory was great, and he reasoned that no fame comes without some risk, and so he let himself be bound a second time. He shook and kicked, and dashed the fetter against the ground, and the iron burst apart and flew in pieces, and Fenrir was free once more. Then the gods grew truly afraid, for ordinary craft would not hold him. Odin sent a messenger down into the dark country of the dwarfs, the cunning smiths beneath the mountains, and they made a thing unlike any fetter ever seen. It was called Gleipnir, and it was soft and smooth as a silken ribbon and no thicker than a cord, yet there was no breaking it, for it was wrought of things that are not, of the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. All these the smiths had gathered and woven away into the ribbon, and that is why none of them are now to be found in the world. The gods carried Gleipnir out to a lonely island in a lake and called the wolf to them once again. But Fenrir was no longer easily fooled. He looked at the slender ribbon and felt the weariness rising in him, and he said that he saw little honor in snapping so thin a band, and much to fear if there were some trick or sorcery woven into it. He would let himself be bound, he said, only on one condition, that one of the gods lay a hand within his jaws as a pledge of good faith, so that he would know there was no treachery in it. The gods looked at one another, and not one of them was willing, for every one of them knew what it would mean. Only Tyr stepped forward. Without a word, he put his right hand into the wolf's mouth, between those great teeth, and so the binding went on. They wound Gleipnir about him, and Fenrir kicked and struggled, but the more he fought the harder the soft cord drew, and he could not break it, and at last he understood that he had been betrayed. Then his jaws closed, and Tyr lost his hand at the wrist, and bore that loss without complaint for as long as he lived. So Fenrir was bound at last. The gods took the end of the cord and threaded it through a great stone driven deep into the earth, and they set a sword upright between his jaws to prop them open, the hilt against his lower teeth and the point against the roof of his mouth, so that he lies there straining and helpless until the last day. There he waits, and from his open mouth there runs a river, and there he will lie until the world unwinds, and the bindings of all things come loose at once. And while such darkness gathers slowly at the edges of the worlds, the gods of Asgard kept their long days bright, with one quiet gift more precious to them than gold, a thing that held age itself away from their doors, and it lay in the keeping of a gentle goddess whose orchard we now drift softly toward. Beyond that bound wolf, far from the iron-fast chains of Fenrir, there lived a quieter power among the Aesir, gentler than any binding, yet just as vital to the long life of the gods. Her name was Idun, and she was the keeper of the apples, the wife of Bragi, whose tongue was carved with poetry. In a casket of ash wood she kept her fruit, smooth and golden, and whenever the gods felt the slow weight of years settle upon their shoulders, whenever a strand of grey crept into a god's bright hair, they came to Idun, and she opened her casket and gave them each an apple to taste. Picture the slow bite, the sweetness on the tongue, and the years falling away like leaves from a branch in a warm wind, the skin smoothing, the eyes brightening, the long, ageless youth returning to the dwellers of Asgard. Without those apples, even the gods would wither, for they were not born deathless, only kept young by Idun's quiet, faithful tending. Now it happened that Odin, ever restless to wander the worlds, set out one day across stony wastes and barren mountains, and with him went two companions, Loki of the cunning mind and Honir the silent. They walked long through a country empty of game, and hunger gnawed at them until at last, in a valley below, they spied a herd of oxen grazing. They took one and built a fire and laid the meat upon it to roast, and they waited, listening to the crackle of the flames, breathing in the savor. Yet when they opened the fire, the meat was raw, untouched by the heat. They built the fire higher and waited longer, and again the flesh lay cold and uncooked, as though some unseen will held the cooking back. Then from the branches of a great oak above them came a voice, and there sat an enormous eagle, vast of wing, and it spoke and told them that it was the eagle's doing, and that the meat would cook only if the eagle were given its share. The three were hungry and weary, and so they agreed, and the eagle dropped down and seized for itself the two haunches and both shoulders, the best and the most of the ox. Loki, watching the great bird gorge upon their feast, flared with sudden anger, and snatching up a long pole, he drove it hard against the eagle's body. But the pole stuck fast, one end gripped in the eagle's flesh and the other welded to Loki's hands, and the eagle beat its wings and rose, and Loki could not let go. Up it carried him, his feet dragging over stones and through thickets, his arms wrenched and his shoulders straining, until he thought his very body would be torn apart, and at last he cried out for mercy. The eagle was no eagle but Thjazi, a giant of Jotunheim wearing a feathered shape, and he would not set Loki down until Loki swore an oath, a binding promise, that he would bring Idun out of Asgard, she and her apples both, and deliver them into the giant's hands. In his pain Loki swore it, and only then was he loosed, and he returned to his companions and said nothing of the bargain he had made. Yet an oath sworn is a debt owed, and Loki carried it darkly back to the bright halls of the gods. When the appointed time came, Loki sought out Idun where she walked, and he spoke to her gently with the smooth and clever words for which he was known. He told her he had found, in a wood beyond the walls of Asgard, apples more wondrous even than her own, and he urged her to bring her own apples with her so that she might set them side by side and judge which were the finer. Trusting and unsuspecting, Idun took up her casket and went with him out through the gates, beyond the safety of the gods, into the lonely wood. And there, where no walls stood and no watchman kept ward, Thjazi came rushing down in his eagle shape, and he caught up Idun in his talons and bore her away through the air to his cold stronghold in Jotunheim, and her apples with her. Now began the slow undoing of the gods. With Idun gone and her casket beyond their reach, no fruit came to renew them, and the years they had so long held off began to gather upon them at last. Their hair grew thin and white, their faces lined and sunken, their step grew slow and their hands trembled, and a grey weariness crept through golden Asgard like frost across a meadow. Alarmed and aging, the Aesir gathered and asked one another when Idun had last been seen, and who had walked with her, and the answer came back the same from every mouth, that she had last been seen passing out through the gates in the company of Loki. So they seized Loki and brought him before the council, and they laid hands on him and threatened him with death and torment unless he brought Idun home again. Cornered as ever, Loki bargained for the means to mend what he had broken. He went to Freyja and borrowed from her the falcon cloak, the feathered garment that gave its wearer the shape and swift wings of a hawk, and putting it on he sprang up from the walls and flew north over mountain and frozen sea to Jotunheim, to the hall of Thjazi. And it chanced that the giant had rowed out to sea that day, and Idun was left alone. Swiftly Loki worked his craft upon her, and he turned her small, changed her into the shape of a nut, and gripping her in his claws, he beat his falcon wings and flew with all his strength back toward the south, back toward home. But Thjazi returned to his empty hall and found Idun gone, and putting on his eagle shape once more, he rose into the sky in furious pursuit, and the great beat of his wings raised a wind behind the fleeing falcon. On they raced across the cold expanse, the small falcon straining ahead with its precious burden, the vast eagle gaining behind, and the watchers in Asgard saw them come, a hawk hard pressed and a shadow swelling at its tail. Quickly the gods gathered shavings of wood and kindling and heaped them along the top of the wall, and as soon as the falcon had darted over and dropped down safe within, they set the heap ablaze. Up leapt the fire just as Thjazi swept across, and he could not check his speed nor turn aside, and the flames caught his feathers and singed his wings, and he fell down inside the walls of Asgard, and there the gods set upon him and slew him. So Idun was restored, and the apples with her, and the gods tasted again, and their youth came back to them, the grey retreating, the years lifting once more. Yet a giant's death is not so easily ended, for Thjazi had a daughter. In the high, cold reaches of Thrymheim, she heard of her father's fall, and her grief turned to a hard resolve. She took up helm and mail and the weapons of war, and Skadi, the ski goddess of the snowbound peaks, came down at last to the gates of Asgard, seeking redress for her father's blood, and the gods would have to answer her. And in those bright halls, even as one sorrow was settled and another took its place, there moved among them still the fairest and most beloved of all, the shining son of Odin, untouched as yet by any shadow, though the first dim hint of grief was already drifting near. Picture Idun returned to Asgard at last, her basket of golden apples cradled against her, and the gods growing young again as they ate, the lines smoothing from their faces, the brightness returning to their eyes. Yet even with youth restored to the Aesir, even with the orchard of immortality safe once more behind the walls, a shadow had begun to gather over the fairest of them all, and no apple could turn it aside. For Baldr, the brightest of Odin's sons, the most beloved of all who dwelt in Asgard, had begun to dream. Let yourself settle now into the soft heaviness of that telling, for Baldr was beauty itself made flesh. So fair was he, the old verses say, that light seemed to shine from him, and the whitest of all blossoms, the small flower called Baldr's brow, was named for the paleness of his shining face. He was the gentlest of the gods, the wisest of speech and the most merciful, and yet of all his judgments, it was said, none could ever stand, for they were too kind to take their full effect. Frigg his mother and Odin his father loved him beyond all measure, and in his hall called Breidablik, the broad gleaming, nothing unclean or false could ever come. So when Baldr's sleep began to fill with dark and troubling dreams, dreams that whispered of his own death drawing near, a cold fear passed through all the dwellers of Asgard. The gods gathered in council to speak of these dreams, and Frigg, a mother's love sharpening her resolve, set out to make her son safe from every harm the world could hold. Imagine her traveling far and wide across the 9 realms, going from thing to thing and asking each to swear a solemn oath that it would never bring hurt to Baldr. Fire swore it, and water swore it. Iron swore it, and every other metal, and the stones of the earth swore it too. The earth itself gave its oath, and the trees, and every sickness that creeps through the body. The beasts swore, and the birds, and the serpents that move along the ground. Poison swore it, and so did all the diseases that wither and waste. Each in turn bowed to the queen of the Aesir and promised, gladly, to spare the bright god whom all the world loved. And Frigg returned to Asgard with her heart eased, believing now that nothing under the sky could ever wound her son. When word of this spread, a new and joyful game arose among the gods. For now Baldr stood invulnerable, and nothing could harm him, and so the Aesir would gather at their assembly and make sport of it. Picture the bright figure standing calm at the center of the green field, while the gods hurled their spears and shafts at him, while they swung their swords and cast their stones, and watched it all glance away and fall harmless to the grass. Some struck at him, some threw, some shot their arrows, and whatever they did, Baldr took no hurt at all. This seemed a great honor to him and to all of them, a marvel that lifted their hearts, and they laughed in the sunlight at the wonder of a god who could not be wounded. But there was one among them who did not laugh, and that was Loki, the trickster, the cunning son of Loki, who felt a sourness rising in him to see Baldr so beloved and so safe. So he changed his shape, taking the form of an old woman, and came in that disguise to the hall of Frigg. The queen received the wandering crone kindly, and they fell to speaking of the game upon the field, and Frigg, gentle and unsuspecting, told how nothing in all the world could harm her son, for all things had sworn to spare him. And the old woman asked, softly, whether truly every single thing had given that oath. Then Frigg, thinking nothing of it, answered that there grew one small sprig west of Valhalla, a tender shoot called mistletoe, and that it had seemed to her too young and too slight to demand an oath of it, and so she had passed it by. That was all the trickster needed. Loki went straightway to the place west of Valhalla, and there he plucked the young mistletoe, and from it he shaped a slender dart, sharpening it to a point. Then he carried it back to the assembly where the gods still made their merry sport. And there at the edge of the gathering stood Hodder, Baldr's own brother, blind and standing apart. For being sightless, he could take no part in the throwing. Loki came to him and asked, in a friendly voice, why he did not honor Baldr as the others did, and Hodder answered that he could not see where his brother stood, and besides, he had no weapon in his hand. Then Loki said he would set it right, that Hodder too should pay his brother the honor all the rest were paying. He placed the little shaft of mistletoe into the blind god's grasp, and gently he guided his aim and bid him throw. So Hodder cast the dart, all unknowing, and Loki guided it true. The mistletoe flew straight and struck Baldr through, and the bright god fell to the earth, pierced and dead. And there fell upon the gods a silence and a grief greater than any words can hold. They stood speechless, unable at first even to lift him, looking upon one another with the knowledge of a sorrow that would never be undone. For this was the heaviest misfortune ever to befall gods and men. When their voices returned, they wept, and Odin most of all, for he alone among them understood what this death foretold, how it was the first cold sign of the long doom that was coming for them all. They bore Baldr's body down to the sea, to his great ship Hringhorni, the largest of all ships, meaning to make upon it his funeral pyre. But when they sought to launch the vessel out to the water, it would not move for all their strength, and so they sent to Jotunheim for the giantess Hyrrokin, who came riding upon a wolf with serpents for reins, and with one push she sent the ship grinding down to the sea, so that fire sprang from the rollers, and all the earth trembled. They laid Baldr's body upon the ship, and when Nanna his wife saw him there, her heart broke with grief, and she died, and was laid beside him to burn at his side. Picture the great pyre kindled, the flames climbing into the grey sky, and Odin bending close to lay upon the fire the ring Draupnir, his own treasure, from which 8 rings of equal weight dropped every 9th night, a last gift placed beside his beloved son. Yet the gods would not surrender him so easily to the dark. Frigg asked who among them would ride the long road down to Hel and offer a ransom for Baldr's return, and Hermod the Bold, another of Odin's sons, took up the task. He mounted Sleipnir, Odin's own 8-legged steed, and rode 9 nights through valleys deep and dark, where no light came, until he crossed the echoing bridge over the river Gijol and came at last to the high gates of Hel. There he found Baldr seated in the place of honor, and he stayed the night, and in the morning he begged the pale Queen Hel to let his brother ride home. And Hel answered that she would test whether Baldr was as beloved as they claimed, and she set one condition. If all things in the world, living and dead, would weep for Baldr, then he might return to the Aesir, but if any one thing refused, then he must stay with her below. So the gods sent messengers throughout all the world, asking everything to weep Baldr out of Hel. And all things wept, gladly, the people and the beasts, the earth and the stones, the trees and every metal, just as you have seen these things weep when they come from frost into warmth. But as the messengers returned, content, they found one giantess sitting alone in a cavern, who gave her name as Thok. And when they begged her to weep for Baldr, she answered with a hard and dry voice that Thok would weep only dry tears for Baldr's burial, that she had no love for the son of Odin, and that Hel might keep what she held. And so, because of that one refusal, Baldr could not come home, but remained among the dead. And it was believed by all, though none could prove it then, that the giantess in the cave was none other than Loki himself, hiding once more in a borrowed shape. The grief of that betrayal would not be borne in silence, and the patience of the gods, so long stretched thin, was about to break at last. Wherever you are lying as these old stories unwind, let your breath slow and lengthen. There is no ending you need to stay awake for, and no part of this you must remember. And the silence that followed Baldr's fall settled deep into every hall of Asgard, a grief that would not lift, and Loki, who had guided the blind hand and then barred the road back from Hel, could not let that silence rest, for there was in him a restlessness that grew sharper the longer the gods mourned. In time, the sea giant Ygir, brewer of ale among the powers, set out a great feast in his hall beneath the waves, where the gold itself gave light in place of fire, and the cups filled themselves and went round of their own accord. And there the Aesir and the elves gathered to drink in the gentle glow of that golden hall. Loki came among them, and the old insolence rose in him like dark water rising, and he could not bear the praise the others gave to Aegir's servants. And so he struck down one of them in envy, and the gods drove him out into the forest before turning back to their benches. But Loki did not stay away. Picture him slipping back through the doors, returning to that bright hall not to make peace, but to wound, for he had come now to unbind every bond of kinship and goodwill with words alone. He asked with a courtesy that was already a blade for the seat and the drink that guest right owed him, and when he had his cup, he turned upon them one by one. To each of the gods in turn, he spoke a mockery sharpened to its truest point, naming old shames and secret failings, reminding Odin of magic's unbecoming and Frigg of sorrows, taunting Tyr, who had but one hand, jeering at Njord and Freyr and Freyr in their turn, until the golden light of Aegir's hall seemed to dim under the weight of his speaking. No insult was too sacred for him, and the powers sat stung and speechless, for there was poison in his cleverness that no cup could wash away. Only when Thor came striding in, lifting the hammer and promising to still that tongue forever, did Loki rise at last and slip away laughing into the dark, leaving the feast broken behind him. Now at last the patience of the gods was spent, and they rose to hunt him down. Loki fled far into the mountains, and there, where the high stones gather the clouds, he built himself a house with 4 doors, one facing each of the 4 winds, so that whichever way danger came he might see it and slip out by another side. By day he would go down to the falls that men afterward called Franang's Force, and there he would take the shape of a salmon, swimming in the cold green pools beneath the white rush of the water, hiding among the stones where no hand could close upon him. And in this way he thought himself beyond all finding, sheltered by craft and by river both. Yet his own cunning would betray him. Sitting one day by the fire in his house of 4 doors, turning over in his mind how the gods might possibly take a fish that wished not to be taken, he gathered linen thread and began to knot it into a mesh, the first fishing net that ever was, working out with his own hands the very snare that could catch him. And as he sat so, the gods drew near across the mountain, for wise Kvasir, keenest of all at reading signs, was among them. Loki saw them coming and cast the net into the fire and fled to the river, taking again his salmon shape. But when the gods came into the empty house, Kvasir looked upon the white ashes on the hearth and read in the burned crisscross of the threads what the thing had been and what it was for. And so they sat and wove the net anew from the pattern of its own ashes. Then they went down to the falls and dragged the net through the water, weighting it so that nothing could pass beneath. Twice the salmon slipped them, once darting between the stones at the river bottom, once leaping back over the cork line and up the falls, a silver flash above the foam. But Thor waded into the midst of the current, and on the salmon's last great leap he reached out and caught it. And though the fish was slick and strong and strained with all its might to be free, Thor closed his grip hard about it near the tail and would not let go. And it is said that this is why the salmon is so slender there toward the tail to this very day, narrowed forever by the gods' holding hand. So they bore Loki away, no longer fish, but bound again in his own shape, and they brought him down into a deep cave under the earth. There the gods took 3 flat slabs of stone and set them on their edges and bored a hole through each. And in their anger they did a cruel thing, for they seized 2 of Loki's own sons and changed one of them into a wolf, and that wolf in its madness tore the other apart. And from the entrails of the slain son they made the cords that bound their father. They laid Loki across the 3 stones, one beneath his shoulders, one beneath his loins, one beneath the hollows of his knees, and the bonds that had been a son's body hardened upon him into iron, so that he could not rise. Then came Skadi, the giant maiden of the snow mountains, she whose own father had been slain by the Aesir, and she carried with her a serpent, and she fastened it to the rock high above Loki's upturned face, so that its venom should fall drop by burning drop upon him through all the long ages. And there Loki would have lain in unbroken torment, but for one who did not forsake him, for his wife Sigyn, faithful past all reason, came down into that cave and would not leave. She took a wide bowl in her hands and held it up beneath the serpent's mouth, catching the poison as it fell, so that it gathered in the basin instead of upon her husband, and for the long patient while that the bowl was filling he lay in peace. But always the bowl would fill to its brim, and then Sigyn must turn away to empty it, and in that little space, while no vessel stood between, the venom fell upon Loki's face, and he writhed against his bonds with such violence that the whole earth trembled and shook far above, and men in their dwellings felt the ground shudder and called it the trembling of the world. So she pours and he rests, and she turns to empty the bowl and the earth quakes, and she returns on and on through the slow turning of the ages, the most patient and the most sorrowful of vigils. And there Loki lies bound beneath the mountains, waiting, for the cords will not hold forever, and far off, past many a winter yet to come, there waits an hour when every chain shall break, and the bound things of the world shall rise, and the long foretold ending begins to gather like a cold wind out of the east. The strife reaches even into the halls where the gods have always thought themselves safe, and so the long unwinding of the world begins, quiet at first, the way a fever begins before it burns. Picture how it starts among men, far below in Midgard, in the cold years that Odin foresaw long ago when he gazed from his high seat and grew silent. Brothers turn upon brothers and become each other's slayers. Sons of sisters break the old sacred bonds of kinship and shed the blood that should have bound them close. Nowhere is there mercy, and nowhere does anyone spare another. It becomes an age of axes, an age of swords, when shields are cleft and split, a wind age, a wolf age, before the world goes down and falls. No man will hold faith with another. The oaths sworn at the hearth turn brittle and break, and trust, which had been the one warm thread holding the world of people together, frays away into nothing. And then the cold comes, the deep cold that has no answer. Let yourself sink into the thought of it slowly, the way snow itself comes down. The Fimbulwinter arrives, the mighty winter, and it does not pass as winters have always passed into spring. 3 winters come, one after another, with no kind summer set between them to soften the long dark, no green season to let the earth breathe and the rivers loosen. The snow drifts in from every direction at once, from the north and the south, from the east and the west, never ceasing, and bitter winds knife across a frozen land. The sun gives warmth no longer. Folk huddle close in their halls and burn what they can, and watch the stores grow thin, and still the white keeps falling, and still the dark presses in at the shutters, and the heart of the world grows slow and cold and heavy with sleep. Through all that frozen sky, two old shadows have been running since the beginning, and now at last they close their jaws. Skoll, the wolf who has chased the sun across the heavens day after day, year upon year, finally overtakes her. He seizes the bright wanderer and swallows her whole, and the warm gold light is gone. His brother Hati runs down the moon along the same long road and devours him in turn, so that the silver lamp of night is darkened too. The stars themselves loosen from their fixed places in the heavens and vanish, one by one, until there is nothing overhead but a great and final blackness, and the earth lies blind beneath it. Now every bond that was ever made to hold the world steady comes undone. Down in the deep places, the wolf Fenrir, who lay bound by the soft and unbreakable cord that the dwarves had wrought, strains at last and shatters his fetters. The gag falls from his jaws, and he runs free, his lower jaw scraping the ground and his upper jaw against the sky, his eyes and nostrils flickering with flame. Loki, too, slips loose from the cave where he was chained beneath the venom of the serpent, free now and full of long-stored bitterness. The whole earth shudders and trembles, mountains crack and crash down. Every chain and every root strains, and Yggdrasil itself, the great ash that holds the worlds in its branches, groans and quakes from its crown to its deepest root, and all the 9 realms feel the shaking pass through them. Upon the cold sea, a terrible ship breaks free of its moorings. It is Naglfar, the vessel built across the long ages out of the untrimmed nails of the dead, and it floats at last upon the rising flood, and the frost giants crowd aboard it and set out for the battle. From the burning south rides Surtur, the fire giant who has guarded the edge of Muspelheim since before the world was shaped, and in his hand is a sword that blazes brighter than the sun. Behind him comes the whole host of fire, riding hard, and they come at last to Bifrost, the trembling rainbow bridge, and as their weight and their flame pass over it, the bright arch cracks and shatters and falls behind them, never to be crossed again. High on the walls of Asgard, Heimdall the watchman, who has stood guard since the morning of the worlds, and who needs no more sleep than a bird, sees them coming. He lifts the Gijalar horn, the great horn whose blast can be heard through all the realms, and he sounds it long and loud, a single rising note that wakes the gods to their last morning. Odin rides once more to the well of Mimir to take what counsel the wise head can give him, and then the Aesir arm themselves, and the Einherjar, all the chosen slain who have feasted in Valhalla against this very day, pour out through its many doors in their bright mail, 800 from each, rank upon rank, and they ride to the wide field that is called Vigrid, the plain set aside for the ending, 100 leagues in each direction. Thereupon Vigrid, the long foretold meetings come to pass. Odin Allfather goes against the wolf Fenrir, and for all his wisdom and all his years, the wolf's jaws close over him, and the father of the gods is swallowed. But his son Vidar, the silent one, strides forward in his great shoe, and sets his foot upon the wolf's lower jaw and seizes the upper, and tears the monster apart, avenging his father at last. Thor turns to face the Midgard serpent, Jormungand, his old enemy risen from the sea, and he crushes its head with Mjolnir. Yet the serpent spews its venom upon him, and Thor steps back 9 paces and falls dead in the flood of poison. Freya meets Surtur and stands against the fire unarmed, for he gave away his good sword long ago, and he falls. Heimdall and Loki find one another in the press, 2 who were never friends, and each one slays the other, and neither rises. Tyr, who once gave his hand into the wolf's mouth, goes against the hound Garm, and they bring each other down together. And then Surtur flings out his fire across the whole of creation, and the flames climb the trees and the mountains and the sky, and the smoke and the blaze pour upward, until at last the scorched and weary earth sinks down beneath the dark water and is gone, and the sea closes gently over it all, and for a long while there is only silence, and the deep, and the slow turning of what is still to come. The world has burned, and now it begins to fall quiet, and you may let yourself fall quiet with it. The flames that Surtur flung across every realm sink low, and the great heat that swallowed Yggdrasil's branches softens into smoke, and then into stillness, and the scorched land slips beneath the cold grey water as gently as a tired body lying down. Picture the sea rising over the ashes, smoothing them, covering the broken bridge and the fallen halls, until there is only water, dark and level and calm, stretching to every edge of the sky. There is no clamour now, no horns, no clash of spear on shield, only the slow breathing of the waves over a world laid down to rest. And in that long quiet the sea holds everything that was, the way sleep holds the long day behind you. And then slowly, so slowly that no eye could mark the moment, the waters begin to part. A new earth rises from the sea, lifting green and clean and dripping into the soft light, and you may imagine it the way you would imagine the first morning after a long fever has broken. The fields come up unsown, and yet already growing, grain standing tall where no hand ever scattered seed, meadows spreading wide and tender beneath a sky washed pale and new. Waterfalls thread down fresh hillsides, and the eagle that the old poems remember wheels above the heights, hunting fish in the streams as though it had always been there. Nothing here is forced or hurried. The world simply grows, the way grass returns to a burned field, patiently, without sorrow, asking nothing of you but that you watch it come. And onto this green and quiet earth the surviving gods return. Vidar comes, the silent son of Odin, who avenged his father upon the wolf, and yet walks now without anger, and Vali comes beside him, and the 2 of them move through the new grass as if waking from a deep and dreamless sleep. Thor's sons come also, Modi and Magni, the brave one and the mighty one, and into their hands passes Mjolnir, the great hammer their father carried through every storm, lifted now not for war, but as a keepsake of all that was endured. Let yourself feel how gentle it is, this inheritance without battle, the strong young gods holding the old weight lightly, carrying it forward into a world that no longer needs it raised in fury. And from the halls of hell, where the dead had waited through the long darkness, Baldr returns at last. The bright god who died for a sprig of mistletoe rises again into the light, and with him comes blind Hodder, his brother, who threw the fatal dart without ever seeing it. The two of them no longer divided by that old grief, but reconciled, walking together in the new day. Picture them clasping hands beneath the young sun, all sorrow set down, all blame washed away in the quiet, and let that reconciliation settle softly over you, for they will dwell now in peace, and nothing will ever again ask them to weep. The gods gather once more upon Yggdrasil, the green field at the heart of the world, where Asgard had stood in the first ages. They sit together in the grass and speak gently of the things that have passed, of the Midgard serpent and the great wolf, of the wisdom Odin gathered and the runes he won, remembering without grief, the way you might remember a long story told to you in childhood. And there in the new grass, they find the old golden game pieces, the very ones the Aesir had played with in the bright morning of the world, before any of the sorrow began, lying scattered and gleaming where the meadow has grown over them. Imagine the wonder of that, finding the small golden tokens of an age long gone, holding them in the palm, and knowing that the game may begin again. And the earth is not empty of people, for two had been kept safe through all the burning. Lif and Yggdrasil, a woman and a man, had sheltered deep within the wood called Hodmimir's Holt, while the fire and the flood passed over the world, hidden among the leaves where the destruction could not reach them. Through all that long ending they drank only the morning dew, and it was enough, and they slept, and they waited, and now they wake into the green dawn of the new earths. From these two all the coming generations will descend, and the world will fill again with voices and footsteps and quiet laughter, gently, in its own slow time, with no haste and no fear. And above it all a new sun climbs the sky, the daughter of the old sun who was swallowed by the wolf. For before the end, the bright soul had borne a daughter as fair as herself, and now that daughter rides the same shining path her mother rode, warming a kinder world. The light she gives is soft and clean, falling over the unsown fields and the gathered gods and the two sleepers newly waked. And there is no wolf now to chase her across the heavens, no fear shadowing her course, only the long, untroubled day. The great cycle has turned all the way round, from the empty silence of Ginnungagap to the fire, and back again to this green and breathing peace, and you have followed it all the way to its gentle resting place. Let yourself rest here too, in the warmth of the new sun, on the soft new grass, where the long story comes quietly to its close, and all is well, and all is calm, and there is nothing left to do but breathe and drift and sleep. And so the world turns again, green and quiet, as if it had only been sleeping all along. Where there was fire, there is now soft grass. Where there were great voices, there is now the small sound of wind, and the gods who remain walk gently through fields they did not have to win. Baldr is home, the morning is unhurried, and somewhere two sleepers wake into a world made kind once more. You need not hold any of it. Let the names loosen and drift. Let Odin and Thor and Loki sink back into the deep where all old stories rest. And let yourself sink with them, easily, completely, into a sleep as wide and untroubled as the new earth waiting beneath the dawn.